There are scientifically proven laws of light, diffraction, resolution, and perspective that render this statement foolish. Due to the resolving power of our eyes and even the most powerful telescopes, we could never possibly see across an ocean that is thousands of miles in distance. It is impossible due to the laws of physics, due to the physics of the angles, not to mention the additional limitations of diffraction. Again, it is a silly statement that we should be able to see across the ocean if the Earth were flat. However, the mistaken or disingenuous conclusion put forth by the so-called scientific community, in spite of these scientifically proven and accepted limitations on light propagation and resolution, is that the reason we can't see across the ocean is because we live on a spinning ball. Do you see the trick that they're playing? It is like telling little children that a guy on a sleigh in the North Pole brings them presents on Christmas. It sounds outlandish even to children, but they don't know any better, and they don't actually see the parents leaving the presents, and they are given this story by the authority, so they believe it. In our case, we have a knowledge gap, an unknown, because we can't see across the ocean, or we see ships and buildings disappear bottom first as they get further away, so we look to supposedly qualified authorities to study these issues for us and provide reliable explanations. For hundreds of years, the scientific authorities, now the space agencies, have both knowingly and unknowingly filled this gap with their own cleverly constructed explanations, and most people just accept their models without researching or using reason and logic. If people did think about the issues critically and logically, they would see that the authority is giving us beautifully wrapped presents and putting out cookies for their fictional Santa Claus, in this case a spinning ball Earth. One way they fill this gap is to use the angular distance of a sky object to invent their model. The angular diameter, or apparent size, is an angular measurement describing how large an object appears from a given point of view. For example, this involves looking at the sky and determining that the sun and moon have an angular diameter of about 31 or 32 arc minutes, which equals a half of a degree. So this is the angle created in our eye or in a telescope, which means that the sun and the moon can be around 31 miles in diameter and 3,500 miles up, or, as the authorities claim, the moon can be 2,159 miles in diameter and 237,000 miles away. And they claim the sun is 864,575 miles in diameter and 93 million miles away. You see, both measurements are correct based on the angle we see from Earth. Knowing the angular diameter or apparent size of a celestial body, we can easily invent a model using trigonometry. We could say the sun is 500 miles in diameter and 57,000 miles away, or maybe it is only 5 miles in diameter and 500 miles up. Or, if we wanted to get really crazy, we could invent a sun that is 2 million miles in diameter and 229 million miles away. Of course, if we did that, we would then have to adjust all of the diameters and orbital speeds of the planets and distances, but this should give you an idea of how they have constructed their model, because they are all built on apparent sizes, the angular diameter of lights in the sky visible from Earth. So, relationally, the math works out. They then construct their universe model around these angles, filling in and changing the numbers as needed to fit their assumptions. This is why the spins and orbits are so ridiculous, yet mathematically they work out because it's all based on the angles. And this is also the reason why they changed the distance of the sun over the years to fit their model. This assertion of boats going over the edge of a ball Earth is silly. Check out this footage from a channel called Wide Awake. This guy filmed some great sky and horizon shots showing that objects can be brought back into view, and more importantly, his shots also demonstrate diffraction and the resolution limit of these objects at those distances and at those angles. As you can see in his footage, the boats, once they are close enough to resolve, appear like little smudges, and they also appear to be floating above the horizon. The boats are not mirages floating in the air, although there is an inferior mirage that appears inverted below the actual boats in his footage. To prove this, he actually tracks them all the way in, and the closer a boat gets, the more resolved it becomes, and the more detail you can see. This is a perfect illustration of visual acuity and the angular resolution of the camera, which is obviously better than our eyes, but the principle is the same. And again, if you increase your altitude, say to the top of a hotel or in an airplane or on a mountain, you create better angles and you can of course see further, but even there you will eventually reach a resolution limit. It is unavoidable, but it is not an edge that Santa Claus is falling over. Look at the water in his shots. Some would call the resolved water line the horizon, but you can clearly see boats fully in the water beyond the resolved water line. You can even barely make out the water being sprayed up from the motor. The surface of the water extends beyond the resolved water line, but it is too far and at too sharp of an angle for the camera or your eye to completely resolve. There's also a lot of diffraction going on due to this angle and the light or atmospheric conditions. Therefore, you get a blurred section that reflects the sky and the boat as an inferior mirage. Again, this happens beyond a point where the eye or camera can no longer clearly resolve the water due to the angle and diffraction. It is where your eye or camera can no longer distinguish points of light. The image blurs and turns into a mirror under certain conditions. Look at the shimmering and changing edges of the top of the waterline as the camera resolves it at its maximum distance. Beyond this distance, the water is at too small of an angle to resolve any detail. At this point, it does exactly what a road will do on a hot day. It reflects the light waves like a mirror because the eye or camera can more easily resolve these reflected light rays than they can the actual surface of the road or water. On the ground or on the water, you can see the inferior mirage or reflection of the boats and cars. Some people will claim that the boat itself is a superior mirage and that the actual boat is over the edge of a ball. This is silly for two reasons. Number one, a superior mirage is inverted, and number two, in this footage, he tracks these boats the entire way in, so you can verify with your own eyes how a boat will barely come into view as a small blur, and then as it gets closer and closer, the angles get larger and your eye can then resolve more and more detail. This is observable, repeatable, apparent, and can be verified by anyone, unlike NASA's theories, of course, that nobody can verify unless they can build a little rocket ship. Finally, I would like to discuss the issue of boats or buildings being cut off by the horizon line over water, which many people falsely attribute to the object being over the edge of a ball Earth. Again, I would start by saying that it is easy to debunk this simply by increasing your altitude. If there were a massive drop in curvature obscuring the boat or building, this would be apparent from higher up. Our eyes are not that bad. We can clearly distinguish slopes and hills in the distance, and when you increase your altitude, you can clearly see that the target object lies on the same flat plane as the original observation point. This is simply a function of perspective, angular resolution, and diffraction. When you stand on the seashore, you can see a horizon line which is basically the limit of your ability to resolve the water, because at a certain distance the angle becomes too small and diffraction also plays a part.